Hey guys, so this video is my introduction into the series of videos that I will be doing for the October Daye series. So as mentioned in my 2020 goals and kind of in other videos since then, I am planning on doing a full reread of the October Daye series, which is a 13-book series currently by Seanan McGuire. And I want to complete this before book number 14 comes out in the first week of September. So this video is really just an introduction for you guys in case you haven't heard of October Daye or you're just interested in what I think I might be doing with this. So let's talk about what this series is about. It is an urban fantasy slash fantasy noir. It's not a super dark and gritty noir kind of thing, but it definitely has some noir aspects to it. And it is an alternate world where fae are real and they kind of live among us. I mean, they don't like humans, so not really among us, but they are at least alive and kicking. And there are little pockets in the real world, in our world, where they live. Enter our main character of October, or October Daye. And she is a half fae, half human changeling. Changeling being somebody who has a fae who has human blood. And she is a knight errant in one of the local fae kingdoms. And as we start the very first book, Rosemary Andrew, she is recovering from a very traumatic experience in which she was doing a nightly kind of nightly like as in I'm a knight kind of errand and tracking down somebody, and she was turned into a fish and left in a pond for 11 years. Now this is particularly devastating for her because she had a human nuclear family who didn't know what happened to her and ended up moving on. So when she came out of the pond 11 years later, they had moved on. And of course she wasn't going to seek comfort from the fae because they didn't care. They didn't understand why this was so traumatic. So she's shunning fae. She doesn't have her human family. She's shunning fae. She has nobody. And that's where we enter the story. And the problem is just set up that one of the people that Toby considers to be an ally, maybe mentor, maybe friend, is murdered. And with her dying breaths, calls up Toby and like curses her into finding her murderer. And so Toby doesn't want to be part of the Fae and Fairylands, and yet she is getting dragged back in to solve this murder. And that is the premise of the very, very first book. So why do people like this series so much? And it's one of those series where if you stick with it, it has some of the most amazing world building and character development and character interactions and story. It's got kind of all of it. So the world building in the very first book is good. It's like better than average. By the 7th or 8th book, you're looking around going, oh no, this is like a fully fledged out world that could legitimately be like out there. It is so well done. And little bits and pieces are added in every book to the point where, and then you get to that point where you're just like, yeah, I believe that this could really happen. And the same could be said for the character and character development. The characters do grow and they do change. And that is spectacular to see. The characters themselves are generally like, there's going to probably be somebody that you will enjoy the most. And if you're like everybody else, it's the Sea Witch is probably up there. But, you know, you get to the point where these characters and their development and their interactions with each other, again, they feel very real. They feel like it could happen. And it contributes to this idea that this is just a fully fledged world. And we just can't see the edges of fairy because we're human. And that's a really, really cool thing. But like I said, you don't really get that feeling until further along in the series, 5 and 6. And it gets even stronger in book like 12 and 13. But it doesn't necessarily, you're not necessarily going to feel that in the first 3 books. They are still very interesting and they still very much hold up. However, it doesn't have that strong, like, oh, this could be real. Additionally, the storyline itself is a lot like that as well. And so the story in the first three books seems pretty straightforward. I mean, it's like your pretty typical urban fantasy. There's this mystery or something that needs to be solved, a problem that needs to be solved, and our main character is going to do it. And there's some mysteries along the way of like parentage and this and that and all that kind of thing that like to leave the reader interested. But we don't really realize that Seanan McGuire was laying down storylines and hints as to what the storylines were going to be in those first three books. And in book 4, that's when you start to find out, oh, things are a lot more complicated than what I thought. And by book 13, like there's still things that are coming up in book 13 that were clues laid in book number 1. And I think that that's really, really cool. And it is one of those things. So if you liked, for example, if you liked Harry Potter for the storylines and world building, you will probably like this series for the same reasons. Additionally, if you're really into found family, there is an excellent one in this. And then, so let's get into like what the downsides are. So one of the things that you absolutely should know, that this is Rosemary Andrew, the very first book of this series, is Seanan McGuire's debut novel. If you are coming from the Wayward Children series, you should know that she definitely wrote the Wayward Children series, after she already had published a number of books. So she was already a lot better of an author. And when you come to Rosemary Andrew, just understand that it's going to be rough. It is a debut novel, and you're going to have to give some grace. I understand if you don't want to do that and you're just going to pass on the series. I actually completely understand it, because I've been in the same position where I'm like, I don't want to have to give a series 4 books for it to get good, right? Now, personally, when I read a debut novel, I tend to be that person that just tries to find the things that I can hold on to, the raw talent that you can kind of see through the cracks of all that roughness. And if I see enough of it in areas that I really enjoy, then I'll generally continue on. And if you're able to do that, I do think that this is a really, really good series and that you will eventually enjoy it. It's just that eventually is not for everybody, especially if you're that person that's like, I only read 1 or 2 books a month. Yeah, no, I can totally understand why you would not want to waste your time, like, or the fact that it would feel like a waste of time. I do understand that. And because of that, there are some things like because the world building is so good, well, we have to build up that world in the first book. So there is a lot of info dumping and that kind of thing. Again, more debut novel kind of issues. Secondly, like I said before, the world building is great. The storylines are great. The characters are great. The development is great. If you hold out, like, so the first 3 books they feel like above average urban fantasy, but it feels kind of typical. Like, or it's average. It's not great. It's not amazing. But if you stick beyond the first 3 books, I do think it gets pretty amazing. And then lastly, the thing that I wanted to talk about that is a little bit of a mess, and that is the diversity aspect. So the queer diversity is really good. However, you have to wait. And part of that is because Seanan McGuire has been upfront that when she created this world, it was very diverse queer. Like the queerness of it was very diverse. However, it wasn't apparent because we are following we're following Toby, and Toby was raised in 1950s with very heteronormative upbringing, and so we didn't see it. And so it took Seanan McGuire, a couple books to realize that queer diversity was not coming through, and then so she explicitly added characters, and it is very good. It just kind of stinks because you have to wait for it. The other diversity is hit or miss a little bit. Like there is a very nice storyline surrounding a trans character, which still is queer, but like specifically I wanted to mention that. There aren't really, like there is a wheelchair user, there is, but there's not a ton of other diversity. So let's specifically talk about race and ethnicity, because this is where it gets really, really messy. And this is a part where I can understand you pulling back and saying, no, I don't want to read this. And that is that, so in the mythology that is set up in the very first book, all Fae are descendants of Oberon and Titania and Maeve. And I mean, we find out a little bit later that that's maybe not quite so absolute as we once thought, but generally speaking, that's what it is. And so, and that was set in stone in the first book. The second book, we did introduce some Fae that were based off of some Asian folklore, which is not good. When you have Asian like Fae that are based off of Asian folklore that apparently are descendant from Western European folkloric figureheads, I mean, that's a little bit icky, right? Like that's not a good kind of thing. Now, the nice thing is that somebody made Seanan McGuire aware, or she realized it on her own or something. And so she had already set the mythology in stone, so she couldn't really mess with the mythology. She had already introduced these characters, so she couldn't just unintroduce them. But what she did do going forward is she minimized the impact that it had. She hasn't introduced any more non-European, non-American, like, immigrant, not Native American. Like, she hasn't introduced any Native American, but like for the most part, the people that we run into are of European descent. So she minimized, and she did that. And then the characters, some of them are going to keep popping up, but for the most part, she minimized their impact and their visibility. And in some ways, that's really, really good, because it's definitely icky to have this kind of floating around that Fae based off of Asian folklore is descendant from European folklore. That is really gross. But at the same time, by minimizing that and having the mythology set up like that, she really doesn't have a racial or ethnic diversity. Now, you might be saying, well, she could introduce humans or changelings that are more ethnically diverse. And you're absolutely right. However, those are the people that are treated the worst in these stories. Like, we're mostly following Fae, and Fae don't give a crap about humans. And so, like, they're more likely to die. They're more likely to be injured. They're more likely to be treated terribly. And so it's not really good to have that be, where you have your diverse characters. You don't want to treat all of your diverse characters like crap, right? Like, so she's trying to minimize the impact of this particular thing. I wanted to address it because if you read these first couple of books, it is apparent. It is one of those things that people have had issue with. And she did try to minimize the impact of it. However, minimizing the impact means that there is not a racial diversity. And it sucks. I really wish it was different. If you can get past that, I think that this is a very worthwhile book. But just know that is a thing. If you can get past the first couple of books with the ickiness, it doesn't really feel icky later. It's just missing, and that's its own ickiness. So I at least wanted to mention that. If you piece out from this series because of that, I understand. I really do. I started reading these books before I was a little bit more aware of racial diversity kind of issues. So I get it. And so those are the main reasons that people may struggle with this particular series. So what am I planning on content for this series? Like, what am I going to do? Well, I'm looking at doing a review for most, if not all of the books. I know that that's going to happen. In those reviews, I'm going to try to do a non-spoilery section, a spoilery for that particular book, and a spoilery for this series. So kind of divide it up so that people can, watch what they want and click out when it gets to be too spoilery for them. I will probably end up doing some videos that are more like, let's talk about the series up until this point, because it just gets really complex. It gets really interesting. There's a lot of clues and a lot of things to talk about. but that's what I am planning. I hope you guys join me. This would be really fun to do as a group. However, since we would have to read at least one book every 3 weeks, I totally understand if you're just like, no. I get it. I think it would be fun. And if you want to join me, please let me know, and we'll kind of go along together. And that's all I got. So until next time, guys, have a happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.